The folks that were reinvesting with new secondary attractions were, seeing a nice pop, actually exceeding revenue. Hi, I'm Russ.
And I'm Danny.
And this is the Memory Makers Podcast,
the show that helps you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories.
Memory Makers Podcast is what we're doing. Sorry, Andy was listening to some yacht rock this morning when I came in, and now I have some just bangers going through my head. Yesterday was Billy Joel, and today it is just a collection of 80s funk and all kinds of good times. So enjoy.
Yeah, I will. That sounds right up your alley.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'll take it anytime I can get it. So,
all right.
How are you?
So today, the format of this is going to be a little bit more of an interview, and I'm going to be interviewing you, Russ, on some of the things that you've learned based upon greater trends in the industry, but also doing lots of site visits. Because when it comes to our end of things and being a vendor and a manufacturer and a partner to so many different entertainment venues and operators, we love to travel and see a bunch of sites and what's people are doing that are unique. What are the things that are working? What are the things that people are struggling with? Because it helps us keep a finger on the pulse of knowing what's going on and allows us to continue to evolve our own products and our own education to be able to meet operators where they're at and where they're trying to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to get right into the first question here. And because I know some of this has been done from online research as well as just in-person visits and all the things in between. Let's just talk about kind of the global growth of entertainment and what is kind of that expected global growth for the next, 5-ish years.
Sure. So one, in chatting with some of our industry consultants, as well as doing some just market trend analysis and things that you can get online, some great things happening in the industry still as a whole. It's up and to the right, which is wonderful. So from a global perspective, some of the big things that we were seeing was from 2023 to 2024, the industry globally grew from about 46 billion to 52 billion, which was, it's nothing to sneeze at. And then a lot of the different projections through, let's call it 2030, 2032, expect that number to be almost doubled at about 110 billion. So great that we're continuing to see a global growth, and the U.S./North American market still accounts for about 40% of that share. So we're going to, I think as our core audience and our core customer base here in the U.S. and Canada and throughout North America should continue to see some nice growth. A couple of different things that are happening with that, right? Just because hey, that's a great number, but also what does that mean for me? And so what's attributing that is an expansion of existing players. So you've got folks like Bolero who are continuing to acquire sites for individual operators that are maybe looking for an exit. Just as they're kind of getting to that point where it's, hey, do we still want to do this? Do we not? And so you're seeing some of that. You're seeing a lot of private equity and hedge fund investments still continuing to be very aggressive in investing into large and small. So whether it's Dave & Buster's, which is obviously on the public side, but then 5-Star Attractions and others, groups like that are continuing to see a big influx in outside capital just to continue to bolster that. A lot of that still comes from, and for those of you who have been part of our audience for a while know, one of the special things about the family entertainment industry is its resiliency and resistance to some of the harder economic trends, right? So it's not recession proof, but it's recession resistant. When it comes to, people are still wanting to, do birthday parties. They're still wanting to have, they may be more discretionary about what they're doing from corporate events and things like that, but that is something that still gets some attention and some focus. And so our ability to maintain or tread water through some of those lower economic periods as an industry continues to invite new money, which is wonderful just from an industry perspective, because that means new players, new concepts, new ways that we can learn and grow from each other and all of that. So that's the big kind of global picture that we're seeing is it's, yes, continued to be up and to the right. And no major drop off that we're seeing. So I'm excited for what that means for the North American market specifically as well.
Well, speaking of the North American market and more specifically the US based market, a lot
For
of
sure.
our clients and a lot of our listeners are within the United States. And it's good to see the global trends just generally, but something happening in Europe or in Australia, someone here is like, that doesn't do anything for me.
Right.
So, what are the trends that you're seeing right now within the US when it comes to top line revenue and what that's done since 21, 22, 23, 24 to
Mhm.
now and what this looking like for the future?
Yeah. So, kind of looking at the post COVID kind of 21, 22, obviously those were some all time high numbers. It was the COVID bubble being burst and people itching to get back out and really getting after it. You had more, some folks that were still getting, COVID relief pieces, like things just felt like they had more discretionary spending and there was a big itch to scratch as far as, doing that. So, 2022, really being and in kind of those all-time high numbers and some of that bleeding into 2023, what we're still seeing is overall in 2024 good, right? Like it's there may be some numbers that are slightly lower, and off a little bit, but that's in comparison to the absolute apex that we've seen the industry from a performance standard. So comparatively, when you zoom back out, overall 2024 still, very good compared to what the main portion of the bell curve or what the graph would indicate. And so some of the interesting things of where some folks were seeing some things up and where some folks were seeing some things down, in the first half of 2023, as interest rates and all of that kind of stuff were still really fluctuating. The Fed, wasn't seeing those interest rates come down as quickly as they had thought. But then we started to see some of that reprieve in Q3 and Q4. And then we, saw a bigger uptick in the industry just as operators felt like they were able to have more reasonable rates to start to reinvest, which a lot of folks were kind of in a holding pattern of strong reinvestment into the centers just because, hey, we have to pay for stuff that we did, coming into COVID. And some of those return on investments took a little bit longer, even with the increased traffic, because there was just bigger overhead that folks had to, there was more debt accumulated through all of that. And so seeing Q4 really, really finish strong was a great piece across a number of operators. The interesting nuance piece that I found in talking with some of the consultants was, hey, if you're a bowling entertainment facility, right, and your bowling was doing well as it has been, it was really staying strong and consistent with the previous year's numbers, but perhaps your secondary attractions were a little bit down when that all kind of shook out. And then as you kind of dive into that group, okay, well, why were some people seeing a drop off in their secondary attractions versus others that were seeing it actually go up? Couple of things that were in there. The folks that were reinvesting with new secondary attractions were, seeing a nice pop, actually exceeding revenue for what they were projecting for those pieces, which was really nice to see, like, hey, the investment is paying for itself when we're putting the money in to do this, opposed to, hey, if my secondary attractions are something that are more in that like 10 plus, 8+ year range, what have we done to add a little bit of extra pizzazz or, added a little bit more icing to that cake? And it also comes down to where attention goes, energy flows. And so a big delineation in folks that were seeing their secondary attractions perform as well as their primary was coming down to much more aggressive bundling and packaging and programming that they were doing to drive traffic through those, use it as a really, important value add for a bigger overall package, and having more consistent messaging promoting those other things. Because it's like, hey, if we're a bowling alley and we happen to have these other things, like, great, they know us for bowling, they're coming to us for that. And so the folks that then were doing more intentional like upsells and messaging on the website through their social media, things like that, they were actually seeing those numbers hold well and which was wonderful. And not that that's immediately shocking, but it's one of those little things of, hey, where are we putting our time, effort, and energy into in order to make sure that everything is continuing to get the exposure that we want it to within the market?
So you mentioned attractions. Okay, we kind of went through the overall venue and top line growth or shrinkage depending on where people were at and how some of the interest rates are affecting things, all that. You started talking about attractions individually as why some have gone up and why some have gone down. Let's now move into the arcade and redemption side of things, which has seen some fluctuation. Can you talk about what you've seen and what you've learned from some of the other people in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's within the arcade spectrum, you're seeing some of the like smaller VR, like the Rabbids and the Kong and those kinds of arcade, versions. Those are not down dramatically, but down like 4%, give or take, as far as like new purchases being part of the game room mix and things like that. Where a lot of times what they're looking at is, hey, what are we pricing for this pay per play compared to what else is there, and where in the past you were able to charge like $5, let's say, for a 2-minute ride on a Rabbids, that we're seeing operators need to shrink that price point down a little bit because now we're getting into this portion where disposable income is getting spread a little bit thinner than it has been in the past. And so if folks are going to be doing things, they're predominantly putting it into, they just want to make sure that they're getting the most perceived value for their dollars. And so being able to kind of look at, why are we seeing and again, it's 4%. Don't take this as a ringing of the alarm bell. But it's just one of those where those are typically a little bit of a longer gameplay. And so, it's one of those where do we want to focus on some other things that we're seeing? Because arcade as a whole, still, as far as revenue per square foot goes, it's bowling and it's arcade and redemption and laser tag are still the top three bad boys that are out there, which is wonderful to see. You're just seeing a little bit of shakeup in the past, it used to be give or take 70%-ish for your redemption-enabled games, and then you'd have 12% or so in your merchandisers and 12% in your video games. We're just seeing a little bit of those move slightly to account for, hey, people are going to be much more keen on the redemption-enabled pieces, which is something beyond the attraction side, the arcade side rather. It's now how do we start getting redemption engaged in everything? So a lot of the virtual reality and mixed reality kind of pieces that don't have a redemption enabled feature on them are going to need to, I think, bring that into the mix in order to make sure that it's still something that mom feels like is worth a little bit more of a premium price because it's a cool experience, but it's also something that's adding towards the ticket count or the point count that they can use at the redemption.
One of the interesting things that we have seen that has happened over time and is continuing to happen today is a higher focus on higher end interior design and food and beverage and building venues that are very often targeted and comfortable for adults and corporate groups and things like that, knowing you'll still get the families and the kids, but the reverse of that is not always the same truth, where if you target for kids, you're not always going to get the adults, right? And I know that you recently, I'd mentioned this earlier, taken a site visit trip to Michigan, and you visited a ton of locations.
Yeah.
And one of them that you went to was Airway Fun Center. Talk about some of the things that you saw that were happening at their venue and what they're focused on.
Well, one, shout out to that team. They are a group of switched on cats, and so really enjoyed getting to pick their brains. So I stopped by there because they're actually in the process of taking out their 15-year-old laser tag arena, which they've shrunk a little bit over time, like 5 or 6 years ago, to make some room for some of the bigger arcade pieces, things like that. And so just from a throughput and capacity, when they were at 24 packs and now they're at 16, like it just wasn't working the same way. And so as we were talking with them, they're like, hey, where's laser tag at as a whole? And I said, well, again, it really comes down to what and how you guys are positioning it. You guys are in a position where it's shrunk in its footprint, and so the throughput and the capacity isn't working for the revenue generation the same way. And so the locations that, and then we were talking about like why golf is really going to be the kind of game changer for them. One, mini golf is so hot right now, and I every time we say that phrase, I think of your Zoolander reference where you're like, that Hansel's so hot right now. But the big thing that we're seeing is, hey, for birthday parties and throughput and everything else, if you're skewing in that, younger age range and things, it's still amazing for the birthday parties and the large groups to be able to accommodate that. For more of the walk-in family traffic, and like we mentioned before, if disposable income is getting spread a little bit more than it has been in the past, the moms or parents are really looking for things of, hey, if we're going to spend this money and we're going to go do it, that's fine, but we're going to specifically pick attractions that allow us to do all of that together. And so when you're really looking at it, like laser tag, does well across demographics, but mom isn't always playing that game, right? Whereas something like mini golf, that is something where the group stays intact, they're socializing, they're doing those things together as they go through the entire experience. And so again, it just comes down. It does not mean by any means that laser tag is going to be going away. It's just, again, what type of business are we trying to drive through that attraction? And so with Airway, they were really focused on, okay, when the families are coming in, we want something that allows them to have an upsell opportunity through something like golf, because that group is going to be able to play together through the entire experience, as opposed to laser tag where we're zipping around and doing all of the high octane stuff, but we're not necessarily staying in a squad of 4 like you would with mini golf. So just a little bit of a shift in some of those where, hey, if we're going after mixed age family groups as the primary demographic, birthday parties are in good shape and things like that. Like, that's something that I think you're going to continue to see why mini golf continues to just be in this huge surge spike at the moment. Always been popular, but again, really, some of that's, and we did this in a webinar for IAPA, like some of that's shaped from post-COVID. It allows people to, kind of stay together and socialize still. And so any of the attractions that we're seeing, whether it's stuff like, the 501 fun darts or their shuffleboard or any of those things, it's like, what allows that little group, that core pod of people to stay together and socially compete while they're doing the experience. Those are going to be the things that continue to really perform well as folks are looking for additions to their center.
Yeah, and you talked about mini golf there, and one of the phrases that I've been using to describe mini golf, I kind of describe that as a catch the wave attraction, where it's been good and solid for a long time, right? But it has these waves and peaks where it's really hot, and we're kind of in that right now. And like you said, we just recorded a webinar very recently with IAPA talking about mini golf, but taking the lessons about mini golf and the way that it is evolved and grown and why it's popular right now, and how to apply those lessons to other attractions within your venue, and how to think about the target audience for each of your attractions, and how to think about marketing for each of your attractions. So I think that it's that to me is kind of a really good place to wrap all this up. It started from the piece of global trends and the US trends, and we're talking about attractions, we're talking about arcades and how some things are evolving, and how one of the big trends right now is the social competition, social entertainment. There's a lot of different words that people are kind of applying to that, but being able to have that piece where they can do the activity and the attraction, but it's really about the social component of it, and being able to compete with one another.
And on that point, I'd be remiss. So, Airway, they really spent a big increase in the interior design and the food and beverage that they've continued to do. And because that is such a critical part of the dwell time when it comes to that social competition. And so it's one of those like, hey, how can we elevate the environment a little bit through the interior design, and how and where are we placing these attractions near those food and beverage centers so that way they can snack and drink while they're doing those things together, because that increases the per cap and it increases the dwell time. Like, those are just those compounding factors that we talk about a lot. And so, if social competition, the social side is how do we keep them chatting and talking trash and having a good time together? Well, that's through the food and beverage. And then the competition side is through the attraction that we look at it with. So it's one of those that if you're especially going after the adult crowd, really making sure that you've got some plans of elevating what those spaces are looking like on the interior, as well as what are we doing for food and beverage? Are we increasing what the menu is? Are we doing more food and beverage promotions? All of that good stuff.
So that seems to me to be the perfect spot to wrap this up today.
I think so too. Thanks for picking my brain and letting me share some of the takeaways and things like that we've come across from. I think that As we see more of these trends, we'll do some more of these kind of finger on the pulse of what we're seeing, really start to resonate well. And we've got Amusement Expo and things like that. So continue to come to you guys with some of these larger, big picture views of the industry as we see them.
If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
And always appreciate that 5 stars, please and thank you.
If you've got ideas for future episodes, guests, topics, anything like that, follow us on social media and send us a message.
And as always, big shout out to Mikey Mike working the 1s and 2s on the Alternet, keeping us moving and grooving. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one, Troublemakers. I feel good. Okay.
You ready, Russ?
Yes, 1 second. And by yes, 1 second, I mean no.
I like how Russ said yes 1 second. So no.
Yeah. All right. I am now ready.